Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to welcome you to this quarterly meeting with analysts, whose purpose is to present yesterday's monetary policy decision of the Czech National Bank Board and a new macroeconomic forecast. Giving us the benefit of their insights today are Czech National Bank Board member Oldřich Dědek.
Good morning.
Executive Director of the Monetary Department, Petr Král.
Hello to everyone.
And Deputy Executive Director of the same department, Luboš Komárek.
Good morning.
The first item on our agenda, as is usual, is a new quarterly forecast. Today it is presented by Luboš Komárek, whom I will now make way for. Luboš, you have the floor.
Good morning again. It's really my privilege to be here and to present today for the first time this new forecast of the Czech National Bank, which is the second one in this year. The outline of my presentation is quite standard. I will start with assumptions of the forecast. Then I will move to the new macroeconomic forecast. It means the core of this presentation. Then I will, let's say, shortly compare our new forecast with the previous one. And finally, this is something like bonus. I will present not typical alternative scenario, but some introduction to J3 Plus model, which is a new model which will be used by the Czech National Bank in future. This is dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model based on new Keynesian economy and with nominal rigidities, and I will, let's say, explain some pluses which you can see there of this model, and also I will compare the current baseline forecast with this J3 plus forecast. Let me start with the external environment outlook. From these four charts, you can see that the GDP growth in the effective euro area will slow to 1.2% this year. The reason is the deteriorating sentiment, and this GDP growth in effective euro area will accelerate in next year to 1.6%, reflecting global demand growth. On the right, you can see two charts, development of PPI, effective euro area, and Brent oil price. And I would like to say that the growth in crude oil prices observed in early 2019 will temporarily slow the decline in euro area producer price inflation. And as you can see, this will subsequently stabilize above 2%. Following a weak foreign demand and inflation outlook, which is really very low in the euro area, the ECB rates and, of course, then also market rates, 3 months Euribor, will remain negative over entire forecast horizon, which you can see from this chart. This chart is, let's say, unique also in this perspective that we can compare assumptions of this new forecast with the previous one. And as is quite clear, we can see that GDP effective euro area is lower. Also, the new path of 3 months Euribor is lower. And as I said, development of PPI and Brent oil price is higher. Second assumption, typical assumption of our forecast is from the fiscal side, fiscal policy. From the chart on the left, you can see that government budget surpluses will decrease significantly over the forecast horizon, which is quite clear here. And a slowdown in private consumption and wage growth and newly introduced VIT changes will be reflected in slower revenue growth. There will be also continued wage and investment growth in the public sector, and the increase in old age pensions and fair discounts will increase government spending too. Overall, government finances in structural terms will be broadly balanced, and government consumption growth will gradually slow, but it will stay above 2%. Fiscal policy from the view of fiscal impulse. This you can see also from this table on the left. And the main message is that fiscal policy will again be expansionary this year, as it was previous year and years before. But the fiscal impulse and fiscal policy, we assume, will be neutral in 2020. Why fiscal policy is expansionary this year? This is linked mainly to the higher than usual increase in old age pensions, continued growth in government investment, it means related to EU funds, and rapid wage growth in the government sector. I already said that fiscal impulse will be and fiscal policy will be neutral in 2020. But there are some proposals to increase mandatory expenditures, as you maybe know, higher indexation of pensions and increase in parental allowances, or allowance, excuse me. And on the opposite way, this may be partially reduced by the proposed increase in some taxes. This is tax rates on games of chance. Now, I will move to the main part of this presentation, and this is the macroeconomic forecast of the Czech National Bank. I divided this presentation of the new forecast to 5 standard sections. I will start with inflation, and the main message is that inflation will be in the upper half of the tolerance band this year and will return to Czech National Bank's 2% target over the monetary policy horizon. Domestic inflationary pressures will remain the dominant factor of total inflationary pressures, which will remain steady throughout the forecast horizon. And from this fun chart on the left, you can see the development of inflation in the past and the forecast of our inflation, also with this confidence intervals. I already described the CPI inflation, but it is fair also to mention something about the monetary policy relevant inflation, which will be only marginally higher than headline inflation over the entire forecast horizon. What are the reasons? Especially the reason is decreased VIT in public transport this year, and the decrease of VIT rate on heat in the next year. Structure of our inflation, if I look at the past, as you know, CPI inflation rose to 2.7% in this first quarter and reaching 3% in March. From this slide, which demonstrates to you structure of our inflation, you can see that core inflation is again the largest or made the largest contribution to the development of our inflation. This core inflation is reflecting continued growth in consumer demand and beyond wage growth. The second, let's say, issue is the development of administered prices inflation. The rise, which is quite clear here from these red columns, of administrative price inflation and renewed growth in food prices also played an important role. Growth in administrative prices was driven mainly by sizable increase in electricity prices, but the price of heat and gas also increased. From the chart lower here, the second chart, you can see the composition of our core inflation to the prices of non-tradables and prices of tradables. And the main message here is that the increase of core inflation was due to both non-tradables, which we have here demonstrated by the development of this blue line, and tradables, which is here this let's say orange or yellow line. Now I would like to explain the development of core inflation and food prices in the future. As you can see from both slides, core inflation excluding foods will remain elevated in the second quarter of this year, but it will then decline close to 2%. High core inflation will be a result of strong domestic inflation pressures, especially in the service sector. And it will then ease it towards 2% mainly due to gradual diminishing domestic inflation, and the previous and temporary decrease in import prices will act in the same direction. The second let's say, note from this slide, it is possible to have from the explanation of the growth of food prices. Food price inflation will continue to increase markedly on the back of a rise in agriculture producer prices. Administrative and full prices, we can see the development of those from this slide. The already substantial growth in administrative prices will accelerate even further in the quarters ahead. The growth will be driven by ongoing increase in electricity, as I already mentioned, gas and heat prices. As you know, the previous decrease in public transport prices for students and pensioners will act against the further growth in administrative prices. Now, let's say some explanation related to fuel prices. Fuel prices will start falling year on year in mid-2019. And this reflects mainly dynamic of oil prices on the world commodity market and also renewed appreciation of the koruna against US dollar. Finally, final slide related to inflation show us standard two graphs which describes nominal marginal cost in the consumer sector. This is this first chart. And the second chart shows us the decomposition of nominal marginal cost in intermediate goods sector. As you can see, total nominal costs will increase at a stable pace of around 2% over forecast horizon. This is following a temporary anti-inflationary effect. The contribution of import prices will turn positive again in the second half of this year. And this is mainly on the back of renewed growth in foreign producer prices, as I already mentioned this before. The comment related to the second chart is following that after the temporary pickup due to an increase in the minimum wage and old age pension, domestic cost, which you can see from this chart, will gradually ease, reflecting slow of cooling of labor market. The second area or section of this new forecast is related to economic activity. According to our forecast, GDP will grow at a stable pace of around 2.5% this year and pick up slightly in the next year. The graphical representation of this statement you can see on the left side from this our standard fund chart, also with confidence intervals. The main message is here that growth in economic activity will be driven by all components of domestic demand. It means household consumption, investment activity, and also government consumption. Only net export will make a negative contribution to economic growth. GDP growth will accelerate slightly in the next year, as I already mentioned, and due to higher foreign demand, which will cause the negative contribution of net export to fade. If we decompose, let's say, this GDP variable to household consumption, investment, and export and import, we can go more deeply and explain the development, firstly, of household consumption growth, which will accelerate this year. You can see this from the left upper slide, as the slowdown in the last quarter of the last year gradually fades and will be supported by solid, albeit gradual slowing growth in wages and salaries. Investment or gross capital formation here on the upper right slide, upper right chart, you can see that will continue to be supported by both private and government investment, mainly from the EU funds. Export and import we have lower in this chart. Export growth, of course, reflects development of foreign demand and the gradual appreciation of the koruna, which, of course, affects competitiveness of companies. Growth in imports is in line with export growth, and this is standard statement because we all know that the Czech economy is very open, small economy, and that's why the development of export is very related to the development of import. And the temporary slowdown in the first quarter of this year reflected weak consumption and export dynamics. The third section here in the introduction of our new forecast is related to the labor market. Here there is the same story which you know many months, and it is that labor market is very tight. Employment growth will slow due to labor shortages and lower growth in economic activity. We have a record unemployment in the Czech Republic, still, if I'm not mistaken, the lowest in the EU. And this is the main message from the labor market. But we can also look at more deeply and use this graphical representation of those two slides. The first one shows us that employment growth will slow, as I already said, further due to labor shortages. Therefore, the tightness in the labor market linked with the record low unemployment will reduce only partially by growth in the labor force. And again, what is very well known, general unemployment rate will be slightly below 2.2% next year. Wages. From this chart on the left, you can see the development in the past and our outlook for development of wages in total, red line in the market sector, blue line, and non-market sector, the orange or yellow one. Wage growth, we assume, in market sector will continue to gradually slow, and it will near its long-run equilibrium level, which is around or which is 5% in the next year. Wage growth will decrease due to slowdown of economic growth, as I already said, and firms' efforts to maintain their competitiveness and, of course, also profitability. However, average nominal wage growth still remain solid, nearly 7%. Wage growth in non-market sector will continue this year, as you can see. This is this yellow line, reflecting increase in the wages of teachers and other public employees. We assume that in 2020 the wage growth in non-market sector will slow to below 5%. Let's say semi-final part area of this new forecast is related to exchange rate. The main message is that the corona will gradually appreciate over forecast horizon. Graphical demonstration of this fact you can see on the left on this slide, in this slide. We assume that the exchange rate of the Czech koruna against euro forecast expect the koruna to appreciate to 25.50 in the second quarter this year. I have to say that the initial condition and the forecasted part of the exchange rate takes into account the broad stability since the second quarter of 2018, that we have to say that this exchange rate, our exchange rate was more stable than we predicted before. The appreciation of the koruna will be driven by a markedly positive interest rate differential with the euro area and continued convergence of the Czech economy. And as I said, the exchange rate will thus gradually appreciate to just below 25 Czech koruna against euro. And at the end of next year, we will reach the level of 24.6 the euro per 1 koruna. Finally, interest rate. Consistent with this forecast is an initial rise in domestic interest rates, followed by broad interest rate stability until mid-2020. I have to say also that the rise in interest rates and the start of the forecast is a reaction above all persisting domestic inflation pressures and growth in import prices. Consistent with the forecast is the initial increase of domestic interest rates, as I said, and followed by broad stability until mid-20. And the increase in rates at the start of the forecast is a reaction primarily to persisting domestic inflation pressures and growth in import prices. I have also to say that the subsequent broad stability of rates until mid-2020 mainly reflects persisting negative interest rates in the euro area. Now I would like to shortly compare our new forecast with the previous forecast. Here from this slide you can see that the inflation forecast is higher for this year due to a higher observed core inflation. This is clear from this slide, which reflects higher growth in the prices of some non-tradables. On the upper right chart, you can see that the GDP growth forecast is slightly lower. due to worse of external demand outlook. Wages is slower due to lower levels observed in the end of the last year, and also leading indicators for 2019 in the first quarter are a little bit worse. And weaker forecasted economic growth is also the factor there. The more gradual appreciation of the koruna, as I already said, mainly reflects its weaker levels observed last year and the worse outlook for external demand. If we compare the path of interest rates from our previous forecast with the new one, which you can see, the broad picture is here, that you can see that our new forecast is slightly above the previous one. And we can say that new forecast implies a higher domestic interest rate path over almost the entire horizon. And from the chart below, we can decompose this to the upward effects on interest rates and, let's say, downward effects on interest rates. On the upward effects of interest rates, we have here a weaker koruna. It means this is this exchange rate, and expectation on external developments. This is this violet columns. It means mainly higher foreign PPI, including oil. And you can see this columns and a contribution which is positive in 2019. Downward effects on interest rates are initial state and expert judgment, and the third one, foreign environment. It means lower 3 months Euribor path. All of them are here in this foreign environment. The last one is in this foreign environment. Finally, alternative scenario. As I already said in our section, we prepare and study, let's say, in the past the development of our and some features of our G3 model, and it was quite long process to develop the augmented J3 model. And today I would like to shortly present the alternative scenario. As I maybe already said, this scenario is based on extended version of the Czech National Bank's existing core prediction model. Is based on the same assumption and outlooks as baseline. This is crucial statement, and it does not capture any specific risk or uncertainty in the baseline scenario prepared by using standard our J3 model. Our plan is that starting with the next inflation report, it means in the beginning of August, this model, I mean J3 Plus, will become the Czech National Bank's main prediction tool, main prediction model. The introduced changes to the Czech National Bank's existing core prediction model are following. Bring the model structure closer to the true situation in domestic and foreign economy. Describe the model structure in more detail. Improves the model predictive properties. And in more detail in the next inflation report, explain this in box. And then this year, in the working paper of the Czech National Bank, that you can really deeply see the structure of the model and all of what is quite standard in academic literature. But it seems to me that it will be nice to a little bit open our modeling door, and to say what does it mean, this plus. The main extension of our standard J3 model is following. We have now more detailed and interconnected structure of a foreign block. Before we had, now in our J3 model, we have effective GDP for euro area, we have PPI for the effective euro area, and we have 3 months Euribor. In the J3 Plus model, we will have HICP in the euro area, US dollar against euro exchange rate will be really the variable which will go to this model, and also directly Brent oil price. This is the first plus. The second, division of foreign prices into energy and fundamental components. In our standard model, J3, we have just foreign prices, PPI. In the new model, J3 Plus, we will have this energy and non-energy part. The third plus is more realistic coverage of the consumption behavior of household. In our current model, we have just one type of households. In the new model, J3 Plus, we have 2 types of households. The normal one, which can save and borrow on the financial market, and this really have influence to consumption behavior. And then we have also this rule of thumb households or consumers. It means those households spends all in the same quarter. The 4 plus is a new way of processing exogenous outlook. In our current model, information from outlooks is included permanently in agents' expectation and decisions. In the new model, J3 Plus, information from outlooks is included only gradually. And finally, that was also recalibration, of selected model parameters and long-term equilibrium levels. We slightly lower our let's say equilibrium development of GDP in the euro area and interest rate in the euro area, and we slightly put higher the risk premium for the Czech Republic. Now I would like really to introduce and to let's say explain what is the comparison between our current J3 model and the new J3 Plus model. From this first look, you can see that there is no any big changes in terms of development of CPI and GDP growth. As you can see, in the baseline scenario, it means a J3, from the J3 model, consumer price inflation returns to the 2% inflation target over the monetary policy horizon. The story is the same for the J3 model and also J3 Plus model. The growth of the Czech economy will be roughly stable this year and pick up slightly next year. And also, if you look at to this differences between baseline and alternative scenario, they are quite minor. Foreign PPI in this new model is possible to decompose to its energy and fundamental component. And if we compare to the baseline scenario, the growth of the fundamental component is somewhat subdued. It means this is reflected in a negative contribution of import prices in total cost growth in this year, while domestic inflation pressures are slightly higher. This maybe final slide shows you the comparison between development of our interest rate and exchange rate. As you can see, the forecast interest rate path in 2019 is broadly in line with the baseline scenario. It means if we compare this baseline, which is based on J3 model, and alternative scenario based on J3 plus model, that we can see that Corona is here slightly, that interest rates are slightly lower. The trajectory is slightly lower due to more anti-inflationary effects of import prices. And finally, a description related to the development of nominal exchange rate, which you can see from this lower chart. Nominal exchange rate appreciates rather more slowly than in the baseline scenario, if you compare this red line and blue line. This is due to the slower growth in the fundamental, it means non-energy component of external producer prices at the start of the forecast, which makes Czech exporter less competitive and thus puts pressure on the koruna to appreciate more gradually. I would like to thank you for your attention, and please, Markéta, if you can now follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Luboš, for the most interesting presentation. Let's move to the Q&A part of the session now. The only kind request I have for you is to switch a microphone on and introduce yourselves before taking a floor. Maybe have the first question, please. Viktor Zeisel.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. Viktor Zeisel, Komerční banka. I have a question about the G3 Plus model. We have been told several times in this occasion that there is kind of a rule of thumb of the trade-off between the exchange rate and the interest rate, that we have the equivalence of one hike with 1% koruna appreciation. My question is, does it still hold in the G3 Plus model? It's a question for Petr Král and Luboš. And for Mr. Dědek, does the board still looks at this equivalence, and does it still hold if we look at the external conditions which might change? Does it ceteris paribus hold that that there is an equivalence between the exchange rate and the interest rate? And would you be hiking if the exchange rate does not appreciate in the manner the forecast suggests? And one more question. We still see some interest rate increase in the third quarter in the model. There's like 16 points increase in the repo rate. How should we interpret it in terms of the model, and also in terms of how the board interprets this 16 basis point increase in the repo rate for the third quarter? Is it like maybe hike? Is it increases it the probability of a hike in third quarter, or is it just a technical thing that it goes up and down? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The basic, let's say, dynamic simulation properties of the new model remain the same as it is in the G3 model. That's why the elasticity of the nominal interest rates to an unexpected one-off change in the exchange rate will be probably the same, and we will, in the future, after we will be launching this new G3 Plus model, we will also accompany our forecast by exchange rate sensitivity scenarios that will provide you with a detailed look at this basic model, simulation properties. But I would like to stress one thing. I don't know whether your question was motivated by the difference between G3 plus and G3 model. Especially when it comes to nominal monetary variables, this alternative scenario is not an exchange rate sensitivity scenario. So the deviations from the baseline are not simple such that the less appreciation trajectory of the nominal exchange rate necessarily leads to lower interest rates. As you could see in these slides, the deviation on in the exchange rate path is on a weaker side when we compare G3 plus with a baseline model, and the nominal interest rates are a bit lower. And this is a combination of many factors, including the identification of the initial state within the G3 plus model, which has a bit more complicated structure of import prices and some other augmented things, as Luboš mentioned in his presentation.
Okay, so let me answer your questions. The first one was regarding whether there is, in the perception of the board, some, from my point of view, it's a rather mechanistic rule. Okay, tit for tat. Exchange rate is not appreciating, so as a result of that, there should be some response of the interest rate and what is the quantitative relation between this trade-off. Okay, so I think that we don't we don't use this, I would say, mechanic rule. Okay, the inflation, the interest rate. Exchange rate development is a kind of one inflation risk. Okay, so all risk should be taken together, and if the exchange rate does not appreciate, as for example our forecast would like to see, it's only the risk, pro-inflation risk to the forecast, which is combined with other risk, and it depends, okay, what will be the net outcome. So this is, I would say, this rule we use. As far as the path of the interest rate, for us, of course, the economic fundamentals are sometimes quite rough, so we cannot take into account all subtleties of the model. So for us, the key information for the model is, I would say, approximate stability of the interest rate. Okay, this is it right translated? Approximate or more or less stability of the interest rate path. So it depends what new information will come. Okay, whether this new information will rather recommend to some kind of hike or decline, but for us, okay, we think the key message is we want to deliver that we expect some interest rate stability in the near future.
Thank you. Another question, please. Jaromír Šindel.
Jaromír Šindel, Citibank. I was quite surprised that you cut relatively significantly the outlook for external demand compared, let's say, to February. But frankly, I haven't seen it reflected in the your export outlook. And also, if I look at your chart that shows the difference between the new 3 months PRIBOR path and the previous one, I don't see the, let's say, some external, let's say, environment to be more disinflationary in this way. So can you a little bit elaborate?
The effect of worsened outlook for foreign demand was incorporated into the baseline scenario, but it was to a certain extent compensated by weaker currency. In our new baseline scenario, we have less appreciating currency compared to the previous forecast because of the new way we work with the exchange rate path, reflecting the experience with relatively persistent, relatively stable exchange rate developments in the past. And when it comes to the decomposition of the interest rate path vis-à-vis the previous forecast, at the shorter term, the pro-inflationary effect from the new foreign outlook comes from the higher PPI growth in the effective euro area, which was fostered also by upward shift in the crude oil price for the entire horizon. And only at the end of the forecast horizon, less ambitious communication of the ECB regarding their possible future normalization of monetary policy is pushing domestic interest rates downwards compared to the previous forecast.
Thank you, Petr. Who's next? Yes, the gentleman on the left-hand side.
Hi, good morning. David Petty-Collin from Deutsche Bank. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the exchange rate, and obviously the fact that for the last 12 months, interest rate spreads haven't had a big impact on the euro Czech. Just interested in your thoughts on why that is, and in your forecasts, you mentioned that markedly higher interest rates in Czech Republic will contribute to the exchange rates moving lower. Just interested in why you think this will change compared to the last 12 months, and just your thoughts on what's preventing the exchange rate from appreciating.
We have been observing some reluctance of the exchange rate of the Czech koruna against the euro to appreciate over the last 12 months, despite we have hiked our nominal interest rates 6 times since the beginning of previous year, which was, as I see it, especially related to the worsened global sentiment, which was affecting in such a way also currencies of our neighbors in the region or some currencies of emerging market economies. So far, we have incorporated this observation regarding the exchange rate stability into our previous forecast by including UIP shocks, shocks into the equation of the nominal exchange rate in our core model, and this set of UIP shocks helped us to explain this persistence of the exchange rate. But after those shocks had been, let's say, assumed to gradually fade away in all previous forecasts, the koruna started to appreciate quite sharply beyond the first quarter of the forecast, which was set based on an expert judgment. So we replaced the UIP shock kind of work in our model by some more structural interpretation of such a development, and we increased the counter risk premium, especially the longer term persistent part of this counter risk premium, which is delivering much slower appreciation of the currency after we start the forecast, and it really explains in a better way the observed exchange rate development in the past, including its effect on import prices and domestic inflation.
Mr. Dědek would also like to comment on this one.
I would like to add something because, of course, you are right. We debate the question why the exchange rate is not appreciating. Is it at the end of economic theory that the exchange rate doesn't respond to a relatively wide interest rate differential? And I think that there is one strong argument in favor that the explanation should be found in the negative sentiment, that there is a very high correlation between movement of the Czech koruna Hungarian forint, and Polish zloty. So they more or less grow or decline in tandem. So that is the reason we believe that the main reason behind the development of the exchange rate is this sentiment. Of course, there is a competing theory, yes, quite frequently mentioned in economic press and other people, that this is the outcome of the results, still some aftermath of the exchange rate commitment, okay, as a result of the foreign capital, short-term capital which invested into the Czech asset. But as I said, we believe that the key explanation is this sentiment. And of course, another important reason was the normalization, quite strong normalization in the United States. So investing in US asset was quite attractive, that outweighed even quite lucrative interest rate differential in the Czech koruna.
Thanks for both answers. Any further questions? Pavel Sobíšek.
Pavel Sobíšek, UniCredit Bank. Let me come back to export performance in my question. As I can see from the chart, you assume export performance in the forecasting period to be almost as good as it was in the past. And it is well known that in the past, as much as 2/3 of the export growth was driven by just one sector, the cars. My question is, what do you think will drive exports growth in the future? Cars again? Thank you.
Unfortunately, we do not prepare export forecasts breakdown. That's why we cannot provide you with a picture saying that those particular items within the SITC structure will be making biggest contribution to the overall export performance, but basically the country as such is oriented to manufacturing sector. It is exporting heavily machinery equipment, including cars, and no one, I would say, could expect that this will dramatically change for the future.
Thank you. Radomír Jáč.
Yes, good morning, Radomír Jáč, Generali Investments. I will extend the question about the interest rate outlook as it is predicted by the model. In one of the previous answers, you explained that for the near term, you see stable interest rates despite some deviations in the model path. Also, your statement says that until mid of 2020, you see stable rates. But if I look on the second half of 2020, the model is showing some decline in the PRIBOR rate. My question is whether it is, again, just let me say, like mechanical quality of the forecast, or whether it really gives you some signal about like easing of monetary policy in the second half of 2020. Maybe I would address this question both to Monetary Department and also to Mr. Dědek as board member. Thank you.
First, I would stick to what Oldřich Dědek said before, that we interpret the trajectory as initial increase followed by broad stability of interest rates until mid-2020, and the slight decline, which is in the path, should not be interpreted mechanistically. It is a response of the fact that at those times, despite the ECB will probably be somewhat about to start increasing its nominal interest rate, the foreign interest rates will still be well below policy neutral rate in the euro area, which is let's say pushing somewhat domestic interest rates downwards, but this decline is only marginal, and as I mentioned, should not be interpreted in any fundamental way.
Okay, and what is the interpretation of the board? Okay, you hear the story, yes. There is some rational explanation. From the policy point of view, we don't have a kind of forward guidance, okay, that this interest rate path should be something the board will respect, okay, in the future, okay. We take it that there is some recommendation of the model, yes, which has some rational explanation, but you know, for me, and maybe I hope that for many other members, what the monetary policy will be in the second part of 2020 is too forward-looking, okay, the approach.
Thank you. Yes, please.
No, excuse me, Nigel Rendell from Medley. Can I just ask you about the manufacturing sector, because we had the PMI release out earlier this week, which was down at 46.6, which I think was the weakest number since 2012, and we've had several numbers below 50. What's your thoughts and what's your impressions on how the manufacturing sector is doing, and is there any sign of it picking up?
The latest available figures, especially the figures from this week, could not be incorporated into the forecast because the cutoff date of this forecast was approximately 2 weeks ago. We are closely monitoring all the developments in both Czech Republic and major trading partner economies. There are there's mixed evidence on how manufacturing sector and the economy as such is evolving. There are sometimes better news from the euro area, better news from China, which could have some positive impact also on the German supply side chain, which part the Czech economy is. We cannot provide you now with any more detailed and thorough analysis of that development.
Thank you. Is there another question? Well, yeah. Oh, sorry, Viktor Zeisler.
Thank you. One more question, please, on this monetary department. On slide 9, you show that the non-market sector's wage growth at about like some 5-6% for this year, while we already know that the teachers got like 15% per rise, and the other public officers are also getting more money, and still we see only rather muted growth in the non-market sector. So I would expect something near double digit. Why is it so low in your forecast? Thank you.
The already done increase in wages and salaries of public servants and especially teachers has been incorporated into the forecast. So this forecast is consistent with the those wage increases, but the rest of the non-market sphere will grow in terms of wages. Will grow much slower, and the figure is not very different from what we had in our previous forecast when the increases of wages for teachers and other public servants had already been known. So there is no big change in this category in the new forecast.
Thank you.
Again, Jaromír Šindel, Citibank. I would like to ask you about two questions. One probably for the monetary policy department. What is the new assumptions for the, let's say, 3 months Euribor steady state, let's say, in this G+3 model? And one for the bank board, if I can. During the presentation, I have a feeling that Governor Rusnok was relatively very positive about the, let's say, risk coming from the trade wars. Yeah, he named, let's say, some agreement between China, US, and so on. But frankly, if US and China agree on some agreement, the Chinese will buy more US products, they will probably buy less European products. So this is a little bit, let's say, different view from my perspective. And also, there is still a risk that the US will impose car tariffs on the European Union. So if you can a little bit elaborate, what is the, let's say, thinking about the trade wars in the bank board?
Within the new model structure of this G3 plus model, we also recalibrated some parameters of domestic and foreign economy, including long-term variables. In the G3 plus model, the steady state for nominal interest rate in the euro area has been shifted downwards from 3.5% to 2.5% by 1 percentage point, which was within the real version of the uncovered interest rate parity equation, was compensated by an increase in count risk premium from 1% to 2%. And as already was mentioned by Luboš Komárek in his presentation, we also slightly decreased the estimated or the assumed steady state for foreign demand growth from 1.8% to 1.5%.
Okay, let me give some comments on how we see the threat of the trade wars. Okay, for us, the trade wars is one of the component of external risks. Okay, we are facing, and we debated this issue quite intensively. On the one hand, there is a relief that the hard Brexit was postponed and is not the imminent threat. On the other hand, the issue of trade wars is still with us, and the situation is changing. You know, there are new elements, the threat of United States, for example, to punish all countries which trade with Iran, okay, which is unknown what will happen, because the China is the big importer of Iranian oil. Does it mean that it will complicate the trade, the agreement between United States and China? So we are observing. Of course, we would be quite unhappy, and we are aware of the fact that maybe the U.S. administration, because the Germany has a net export surplus, okay, to United States, so maybe the U.S. administration will try to use some violent weapons, okay, against Europe. But as I said, okay, it's very difficult to see what will be the outcome from the current turbulent world.
Thank you. Lukáš Kovanda.
Good morning. Good afternoon, sorry. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lukáš Kovanda, Czech Fund. I would like to ask you, slightly extend the question before. Could you elaborate, please, more on your discussion at board about Brexit, about hard Brexit? Of course, we all know that it was postponed, it has been postponed, but still you have been expecting for the next year the exchange rate 24.6, but market consensus right now is about 26 for next April. So it seems to me you do not expect right now any negative outcome of possible hard Brexit for Czech economy, because otherwise I would bet that the exchange rate will be weaker. Don't you think so? Thank you for a reply.
Okay, as far as the Brexit, you are right. Okay, the threat was only postponed because the outcome will depend whether the Conservative and Labour Party will be able to find some consensus, which I think would be extremely difficult. So the outlook that the hard Brexit will happen, even though the British Parliament voted against it. So it's very difficult to do something with it. We have some, the monetary department elaborated some economic implication. Okay, what will be the impact, mainly through the mutual trade. Okay, of course, if the hard Brexit would happen, it would have much harsher consequences. Okay, not only the stagnation of the mutual trade, but quite serious impact on investment sentiment, and who knows? Okay, it's very difficult to see. As far as for our deliberation, okay, on Thursday, it was a kind of relief, okay, maybe short-term relief that this hard Brexit was avoided for the time. And of course, we will see what will happen. And what are the implications for the exchange rate? Peter, if you can, some comment on it. If the hard Brexit will happen, okay. So it's
so if I may, I can just remind you of the hard Brexit scenario I presented here a quarter year ago, where we were facing this threat much more intensively, maybe than now. If you remember, there was quite a significant negative impact on the Czech export and GDP outlook, reflecting the fact that not only direct trade with the UK, but also indirect trade via our major export, major trading partner in the euro area will be affected, and the exchange rate reacted to that NFA and foreign demand shock by by depreciation against the baseline, and the final response of the domestic inflation and monetary policy in reality would definitely depend on how the higher import prices would be compensated by lower domestic inflation pressures. In that sensitivity scenario, the final balance of pressures was somewhat to higher in nominal interest rates, some higher domestic, some higher overall inflation pressures, to which the monetary authority had to react. But as Oldřich Dědek mentioned, no one really knows what would be the exact profile of all those variables in the real test if the United Kingdom leaves the European Union without an agreement.
If I may.
Thank you.
So how would you explain the quite considerable difference or discrepancy between your own forecast for next year exchange rate, Czech koruna euro, and market consensus right now? Because as I said before, it's 26 from the point of view of the market, and it's 24.6 or something from the point of view of a Czech National Bank. Thank you. So what's your major explanation for that discrepancy between the forecasts?
I'm not sure whether there is I would say, a market consensus. Maybe it's a kind of average of individual assessments. And we were advised that analysts have a quite there is a broad spectrum on the assessment what the exchange rate will be in the future. So we don't have some strong belief that the markets as such believe something which is quite different from the Czech forecast, which takes into account some arguments, okay, the interest rate differential, the premium, this external development. So that's why I don't see any this sharp divergence, okay, between the market and the Czech National Bank forecast.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Martin Janíčko, Moody's Analytics. Just a quick question about the G3 plus model. I might have missed it when you were presenting it, but I was intrigued by a new way of processing exogenous outlooks. If you can a bit more elaborate on this, if it's possible. What should I understand under that? Thank you.
I will use the opportunity that our colleague, namely Karel Musil, head of our macroeconomic forecasting division, is also present here, and I will ask him to answer this question, which is rather technical, as you will hear in a moment.
So, good afternoon. Really, it's more about a technical way how to handle the external assumptions of the projection. It's not related directly to the model structure or the way how the model is designed. It's the way how the technique for using or incorporating the external assumptions to the projection is used. And the difference is, or I will try to explain it in non-technical way. The main difference is that we are using just a part of the available information from the external assumption to decide about the current situation in the economy. And once we are moving forward, we are utilizing also the future to discuss about that. So it means that we are using all the available information, but partly as we are moving for the future, then this information is used. In the current framework, actually we put all the available information in one moment and decide what will happen. In the new approach, it's done step by step. But we will explain that in more details during the next meeting with the analysts, where we can describe that in details. And of course, we are preparing, or we will prepare a working paper, which will be much more technical explanation there.
Thank you, Karel. Are there any other points you would like to question our speakers about? Well, if not, let me close this meeting by expressing thanks to all our speakers and adding thanks also to you for coming and participating in this fruitful discussion. See you in 3 months' time. For now, goodbye.